So the last 2 weeks we've been looking at what discipleship means. We've been looking at what it means to follow Jesus. The last 2 weeks ago we looked at, okay, what's the reason? What's the hook? What's the thing that Jesus draws us in with? The reason why he gives us that we should follow him, that we should want to follow him. And then last week we looked at, okay, well then what does it mean to follow him? What does it actually look like? What is it going to require us? What does it cost to actually follow him and be a disciple? And so then as we journey on this road to discipleship, then this week I wanted to kind of ask this question. Okay, then what's this all for? What are we getting out of all this, right? What's the intended goal? Because if we're following and if we're going after Jesus, if we're his disciples, then there should be kind of a picture that he paints for us as to this is what it means to be a disciple. This is what we're going after. This is what it's all going to kind of end up being, right? Because as much as the journey is great as well, we want to look at, okay, how does that journey look? What is it that God is promising us as we follow Jesus? Because if we don't know what he's promising us, if we don't know what we're going after, then in many ways we're going after something that's kind of foolish, because you got to know what you're going after, right? In some ways, if you're studying or doing whatever it is that you're doing, you kind of have to know what it is that you're trying to get. Not that that's the only reason, but you have to at least have a painting or a picture of that, right? What's the hope? What's the result of what Christ has done? What does his life and his death and his resurrection and his ascension actually mean for us? Like, what does it do? What is it that Christ has done? So if you have your Bibles, if you open up to Galatians 5, we're going to read this really quickly. And the answer is really simple, at least what Apostle Paul tells us. But the answer isn't so simple when you actually look into what it means. So if you have your Bibles with you, Galatians chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. So what is this all for? What is the whole point of all of this? Well, Paul tells us very clearly, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. The Greek language is very emphatic. It says basically, for freedom Christ freed you. And the word to have freed is I'm going grammar on you, is the aorist passive tense, which is literally what it's saying is, one time he did this thing and he's freed you. He's granted you freedom in what he's done. In his life, death, resurrection, and ascension, he's given you freedom. So it got me thinking a little bit. What in the world is freedom? Anybody know? Stephanie said to be free, which is a good definition, but not a good one because you're using the word in the definition. That's not going to get you a lot of points in your English class, right? What is freedom? And part of the reason why many people might not be answering is because it's a very hard concept to define, isn't it? If you Google freedom, you're going to get a lot of different answers based upon who's talking about what and what context you're talking about. Freedom for people out in the Middle East, it means something different than freedom for us, doesn't it? If you watch movies like I do, and if you're a big Braveheart fan, is a way back movie, Mel Gibson when he was really young. He's this guy named Sir William Wallace, and he cries out freedom all the time. But freedom for them meant something completely different than what freedom means for us, right? So what is freedom, right? Because if you don't understand what freedom is, then you kind of don't understand what this is all about, right? And again, we talk about that all the time. If we don't understand what this is all for, then all the things that we're doing in some ways maybe is meaningless to us. Because what is it all for, right? What is it that we're doing? What does it all mean? What is it that we're doing? And I think one of the things that we want to do is to define what freedom means, what Paul means by freedom, and I think then what we mean by freedom, or we should think about freedom, right? And then see how it applies to our life. Because one of the things that become very clear to me is that when we read our Bibles, there are a lot of words that we think we know, but there are a lot of words that we don't understand what they meant. So for instance, one of the words is hope. Anyone know what hope is? What's hope? It's not a trick question. What's hope? What does it mean to hope? Everyone's very shy, I'll listen. Huh? To want something. Would everyone agree? Hope is to want something. And so hope basically at best is that you kind of maybe perhaps would get something, right? Like there's a huge question mark surrounding this word hope. We hope that we would get something. Well, the biblical word for hope isn't that at all. The biblical understanding of hope is a guaranteed assurance that something is going to happen. You just don't know when. So when we hope for Christ, it's literally saying we know for sure, we can take it to the bank that it's going to happen. We just don't know exactly when, but it will happen. And so for us, we have to really define what freedom means. Because if we think freedom is one thing, versus whatever it is that Paul's talking about, then we're going to have a very skewed understanding of what this is. And for us, many ways in our society, freedom means a lot of different things. But the one thing it seems that a lot of people agree upon is the freedom is the ability to be you, do you, want you. Whatever it is that you want, whatever it is that you feel like it is, right? Whatever floats your boat type of thing, that's freedom. To have the ability to choose and to be whatever it is that you want to be. To not let anyone else dictate anything about you, but for you to be completely free to choose whatever it is that you want to choose, no matter what anyone thinks, right? And that's what we think freedom means. So then, in some ways, we have to ask, is that what Paul, and is that what Jesus means by freedom? And then secondly, are we then actually free? Because it seems for us very clearly that God's will is for us to enjoy freedom. That much more important than a lot of different things that we do here, a lot of different things that we seek as Christians, that freedom is at the top of the list of what God wants for us. As John Piper says, other things are not as important as standing fast in freedom. Or as John Piper again asks, he says, are we as concerned about enjoying freedom as we are concerned about our other pressing decisions like schools, jobs, careers, or marriages? Or he asks it differently. He says, or do we devote as much prayer, thought, and study into enjoying our freedom as we do into figuring out how to do well at school, getting a good job, getting a good career, or getting married, dating, whatever it is? Do we spend our time thinking and concerning ourselves with freedom and what it means to live in freedom as much as we do the other things in life? Or do we simply not care about freedom at all? That freedom is what Christ came. Freedom is what Christ died for. It's what he rose again for, and it's what he ascended for. So then, the question for today is freedom. What that is. What is it? So here's what we want to do. First, we want to outline what Paul means by freedom here in Galatians 5. Then I think we want to make that and put it into our context of what we think means freedom. And then, thirdly, ask ourselves and really examine whether indeed we are free. Because if we're not free, then we'll see we're something completely, utterly different. And I don't think what we are when we are not free isn't what we want to be. Okay? So let's draw into Galatians 5 first and see what Paul means by freedom. So Paul says, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. He's writing a letter. Any of the Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, Philippians, all those eons, right, in the New Testament, they're all letters that Paul writes to real people. So he's writing to a church in the ancient city of Galatia, right, which is the ancient city way back when, after Jesus died. And it's a city full of pagans. And what they mean by the word pagans is basically non-Jews, right? So it's not a Jewish city. It's not an anything city. And then once Christ died and he rose and then he did this thing, then all of a sudden a huge church called the Church of Galatia, it rose up and then it sprung up into this new thing called Christianity, right? And Paul has a very good relationship with this church. And all of a sudden, as he's doing his thing, he's in prison and he's writing and he hears that the Church of Galatia is doing really random and not so good things. And one of the things that they're doing is that there's these people called Judaizers, right? And they're basically people who are Jews who come into the Christian churches, right? And go, hey, wait, you're doing things all wrong. In the ancient Jewish religion, the one that we believe with our God, right? They say that you have to get circumcised. And if you want to know what circumcised is, go Google it. Or ask your parents, right? They say you have to get circumcised. If you don't get circumcised, you're not pleasing before God's eyes. If you don't follow certain food laws, you're not pleasing before God's eyes. And so they stress two things, primarily circumcision and primarily food laws. And so what they started doing in these churches is saying, hey, are you this? Are you this? And as historical context, pagans weren't circumcised. That was a Jewish thing, right? So nobody was circumcised. Nobody was following these rules. They understood Christian faith. They understood the life that God has given differently. And all of a sudden people started coming in and saying, like, you got to do these things. And so Paul gets very upset, right? He gets very upset. And he's saying, you're not doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. And so he basically writes them this letter and he lays it out very clearly. He's saying it's for freedom that Christ has set you free. And what you're doing right now is the very opposite of freedom. What's the opposite of freedom? Slavery. Right? If you're a free man, you're a free man. And if you're not a free man, you're a slave. And Paul loves to set up these comparisons between these things, and he does it in all of his books. And one of the ones that he sets up is freedom versus slavery. And he says, basically, you have to keep it. To stand firm means it's a military language. It means to keep in line. It means to do all that you can to remain to stand firm in this freedom. He's saying, Christ, all that he did, you remember the cross? Remember all the blood and all the shedding and all that stuff? He did all of that so you could be free. But what you're doing now is you're taking on a yoke of slavery. And if you know, everybody remember what a yoke is? Clearly? It's the thing that you put around the oxen's neck so they can pull the plow, right? So what he's saying is you were set for freedom, you've been freed, but now by doing these things, you're putting a slavery yoke, you're putting chains around you, and you're basically working in a completely different way. And if you read what he says, it's basically the language is very, very, very strong language. He's saying you're tied down. You've got chains around your neck. You were once free, but now you've chosen to do something completely different. You've forgotten what Christ has done for you. And so what Paul is trying to tell them and us in this context, he's saying, you can taste freedom. And this is a real word of warning to us. You can taste the freedom, you can taste the life that Christ gives, but you can forget it real easily too. So he's saying, you've chosen to go back into slavery. What are you doing? Because the people came into this church and said, you have to do these things to earn God's favor. And if you're not circumcised, if you're not following the food laws, then you're not earning God's favor. And God hates you. And so you got to do these things to make sure that God likes you. And so what they started to do was to go back. And they started to do that, right? And so one of the things that Paul is laying out is, are you doing things for freedom or for slavery? And one of the clear examples of this is in our house, in our living room. If you've ever been to my house, the living room after a little while, when Mason and Connor get to the living room with all their trains and their cars and all their books and all that kind of stuff, it becomes a madhouse. And so before they go to bed, one of the things that they have to do is to clean up. And so there are times I can conduct this cleanup session one of two different ways. The one way is the lazy way, is the way that I do often, and I apologize to my kids for it, but I can literally sit on my couch as the TV's on and go, Mason, Connor, 청소, clean it right now. And they're kind of, they'll look at me and they're like, because they don't want to go to bed and they don't want to clean, and so they'll kind of ignore me. And then I'll go, and then, as parents do, you throw the last name in there, Mason Chung, Connor Chung, right? And then the tone of voice changes. And then if they don't listen, then the next one is clean it or you get meme. My kids are 4 and 2, okay? You have to say meme, okay? Get over it. And then if that happens, then all of a sudden the threat of meme is like, oh my goodness, I don't want to get punished. So then what they do, they clean. And I sit there and watch like, that's right. You better listen to me. The other way that it happens when I'm a nicer and better and loving father instead of the mean tyrant father is I'll go, hey, let's clean up before we go to bed and I'll help you. Turn my TV off and I get on the floor and then we start helping. So I get the buckets and I go, hey, where does this go? And I teach Connor where all the things go. And then he goes and he puts them in and I say, here. Sometimes we'll have fun and we'll throw them in the buckets like we're playing basketball or something. But when that happens, there's a completely different reaction. Normally, when I get onto the floor to start cleaning, they stop whatever they're doing and they start to come and they start to clean up almost immediately. But when I yell at them to clean in fear of punishment, it takes 1, 2, 3, or even 4, depending on how quickly I want to raise the tension in the room, right? And raise the threat of imminent punishment. That's kind of what it is. Freedom is understanding that God has come down and has done these things for us so we can live. And we live in that. The yoke of slavery is understanding that if we don't, we're going to get punished. And so we better do these things so we won't get punished, so we won't get cursed, or if we do, we're going to get a reward or a blessing. It's not to understand something utterly different there. And Paul is examining a very serious issue because he says in verse 2, he says, if you take this yoke of slavery, if you take circumcision, if you take the path that says if you do these things, God will like you and he will bless you, or if you don't, he will punish you. He literally says Christ is of no benefit to you, no profit at all. He says if you take that approach, Christ means nothing to you. It's a financial language. It means you'll literally get nothing out of it. He's saying don't bribe God for his benefits. He's saying don't let anyone trick you into thinking that God is wanting you to do things for him so that he can be happy with you. And if you're older and if you have a bank account, it's kind of like you have investments, right? If you put it into a bank, that you get earn interest and stuff. He's saying don't invest your moral doings and think you're going to cash out any benefit. That means nothing to you and nothing to God. And then in verse 3, he goes even more serious language. He says, if you are doing so, then you're under obligation. Again, more financial language. He's saying, if you do so, then now you are a debtor. You owe God a really, really big debt because there's an entire book of laws that you're supposed to follow. And if you choose to go this route, then you got to follow the entire book to a T, every single one of the laws that he has written. And as we all know, how easy is it to satisfy the law? All 600 and some laws. Do we ever do it? We talked about it last summer. How well do we keep the 10 Commandments? Not very well. So he's saying, why would you choose to go that route? Why would you choose to try to pay back something that you can't pay? Why would you try to earn your way through something that you can't earn? And then in verse 4, he takes it even one step further, and he says, if you do this, if you try to earn, if you try to pay back what you're trying to get, then guess what happens? Then you're going to be severed from the grace of Christ. Do you know what it means to be severed? It means to be separated, but more so than that. It means literally to take this thing and then cut it, to sever. It's not fun language. You don't sever a lot of things in your life, okay? I don't know how many times I've ever severed something from what it is. To sever something means to literally, you can just like pull. If you pulled my arm out of its socket, then you severed it from my body, right? He's saying, don't treat yourself like you're a debt, like you're a debtor. Treat yourself like the free person, like the free sons and daughter that you are. So Paul's making one thing very clear, it seems to me. He's trying to eliminate this idea in the church that somehow what Christ has done, right, and what he's giving to us is nothing more than a free gift. Or let me put it differently. He's saying what he's eliminating is the idea that since God has done something great for me and for us, then we are going to devote our entire lives to paying back our debt, even though we can't. Is that the way we approach God? And maybe that's my mistake or a pastor's mistake. We make it seem like what Christ has done is so much, and indeed it is so much. But then we pressure you and pressure ourselves into thinking that because he's done something so great for us, we have to pay him back, even though we can't. Even though he tells us not to, we try our entire lives to try to pay him back. And it's kind of funny. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you've ever been at like a Chipotle or at a store, and let's say you're there, all of a sudden you realize, holy crap, I don't have my wallet, and you've already ordered all your food. Have you ever experienced somebody behind you is going to be really nice and says, oh, don't worry, I'll pay for it. A stranger, a complete stranger you don't know, right? Then you take it, and you take it as a gift, and then you go on your merry way, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, the greatest thing happened to me today. Somebody paid for my Chipotle when I forgot my money. But if I offered to pay for your Chipotle, what are you going to do? Most of you would be like, thanks, Pastor. I'll get you next time. Or some of you would say, no, I don't want to go. I'll go, hey, you want to go to Chipotle? You got something to eat? And it's like, oh, I don't have any money. It's like, don't worry, I got you. It's like, no, I don't want to. When clearly you want to because you're hungry, but you don't want to be the burden and to take money from me because then you know that you have to pay me back. Funny how that works, isn't it? Right? So are we free, understanding grace that God has given, or are we trying to pay God back? That's what Paul's trying to get at. Are we free or are we slaves? Now, if we break this down further for our context, I don't think any of us are struggling in here with food laws and circumcision. I apologize, ladies. I know it's a gender-specific thing, but you get what I mean, right? So I started thinking, what are we as common modern, postmodern people, what are we enslaved to? Because the question that Paul is asking is, you're either free or you're a slave. There's no in between. You're either free or you're a slave. And so I started asking, what does it mean for us to be free? And more importantly, what does it mean that we might be enslaved to something? And if you read the later in the chapter, in chapter 5, clearly the result of slavery versus the result of freedom is very, very clear, right? The result of slavery are things like immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, on. And the things of freedom are things like patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and self-control, all these wonderful things. So I wanted to ask us, what are we enslaved to? Or I wanted to ask us maybe other ways, are we indeed free? That's the question. Are you free? Or are you enslaved? And if you're enslaved, what are you enslaved to? What is our yoke of slavery? For Paul and the people in Galatia, it was trying to earn God's favor by doing things, external things. And so for us, what is it? Right? So I'm reminded of the text in Luke 13. Do you remember the story? The story is of a woman who's been bent over like this for 18 years. Do you remember? There's a story. I don't know if you remember from Sunday school. And so the story goes like this. There's a lady who's bent over like this. She has some condition where she literally cannot get out of this physical state. So all her life is lived like this, whatever she does. And you can imagine whatever it is that she's doing it like this, which is highly awkward, right? Even to talk to people. So like even when you sit, I don't even know how you're supposed to sit. Like and imagine trying to do other things, right? So she's like that, and she's in the synagogue, and let me just cut the story short. She's in the synagogue, and Jesus sees her, right? And then in the middle of it, he calls her up, and he pulls her all the way to the front of the stage, and they're there, and all of a sudden, he talks to her, and then he does what? Do anyone remember? Stephanie, louder. Wrong. He doesn't heal her. What does he do? He frees her. Stephanie, I set you up for that one, but it's because I like Stephanie, right? True, he heals her, but the language he uses isn't heal. Did you notice? Now, isn't it interesting? Because for all of us, our direct reaction to that is, oh my goodness, Jesus healed her. She has this condition. She's got this medical thing, and he healed her, but he doesn't. He frees her. He releases her. And momentarily, immediately after he releases her, she gets up, she raises her hands, and she starts glorifying and praising God. Why? Why does Jesus say that you are now free? Because for her, she had been enslaved to this condition. But it wasn't just the condition that she was enslaved to. Imagine living like that. It was all the social context. It was all the mocking, all the people looking at you funny, all the sense of bitterment, all the other things that come with being in that kind of condition. The hate, the bitterness, the anger, the hurt, the suffering. She was enslaved to all that. And so when Jesus sets her free, he's not just healing her. That's not the point. He's freeing her from the lifestyle. He's freeing her from a method of thinking. He's freeing her from so many different things, and she glorifies God. And so as we look around this group, the question is, are we free? Or are we like the bent over woman? Well, the question that you should ask yourself is, am I free? Or am I like the bent over woman? And I would say, just being honest, and I'm not differentiating myself or your teachers, all of us in here, we're enslaved. I know, not good news you wanted to hear today, but we are. So the question is, to what? Well, the list is many. Actually, I did this, I just, as I was thinking about it, as I was preparing this week, I sat there and I asked myself, I wrote it down, what are we enslaved to? Literally, if you look at my notes, it says, what are we enslaved to? Question mark. And then I just started writing things down, just free flow off the top of my head. And this is what I came up with. And I had to stop myself because I could have just kept on going and going and going. I came up with control, success, popularity, self-identity, pride, greed, pain, insecurity, legalism, paying back my debts, worth, shame, guilt, envy, and on and on and on and on. After a little while, I just had to stop. There's a lot. But as I examined the list, and I started looking at it and really started to focus in on what it was, if there was a similarity, because I can't explain all those things to you. I'd run out of time, I always do anyway, right? I looked at it and I said, okay, all these things are surrounded by one profound question that I think we all can relate to, no matter who you are. And the question is this: what are we enslaved to? Is this overarching question in my life that blares out as loudly as anyone can hear it. And the question is, am I good enough? And the craziest thing about this question, there's really two answers, right? It's a yes or no type of thing. Well, I guess maybe there's a maybe, but generally it's a yes or no. No matter which way you answer it, both answers suck. Both answers enslave us. Right? Because the negative is this. The negative to am I good enough is no, I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm too broken. I'm not worth anything. I'm too damaged. I didn't get this award, or I didn't get into this college because I'm not whatever enough, smart enough. Well, and my parents split up or divorced because I'm messed up or I didn't do well. I got rejected because of yada, yada, yada. What I have isn't enough. I'm not as good as this person. I'm not as right as that person. My family isn't as nice. We don't have enough things. I'm not talented enough. I'm not experienced enough. And the list could go on and on and on and on. And the question that you have to ask yourself is, if you're asking these questions, if you're answering this way, the question is, am I or will I ever be good enough? And the answer is no, isn't it? There are very few people in the world who are literally the best in the world at what they do. And you can count them like on one hand. But even then, they're not really the best either, right? Because then they're compared to people in history, right? So like yesterday, there was a huge fight between Mayweather and Pacquiao, and I won't go into it, but Mayweather won, and the question is now, is he the greatest boxer of all time? And then people are like, no, of course not, because he's better, da-da-da-da. And there's all these things. Will you ever be good enough? No. And Floyd Mayweather is the richest athlete ever in the history of the world. He's the second most winning fighter ever at 47-0 and all these things, and yet still people are questioning me like, you're still not as good as this guy, or this guy. But the positive answer to that is just as enslaving to me. Am I good enough? Yes, I'm good. I'm too good. Actually, I've worked too hard and I've accomplished too much. I'm owed this blessing. I've earned my success. God owes me. You owe me. I don't need God. I don't need your help. I don't need any of you. I've gotten everything that I've earned because I'm really good at what I do. And it leads to different attitudes, doesn't it? I'm too good for you. Oh, you're not in my class. I can't hang out with you. You're too ugly. I can't hang out with you. You're not rich enough. I can't hang out with you. Your house, your car sucks. I can't ride in that car. You don't speak well enough. I can't be friends with you. I can't be seen in public with you. Your clothes, they're too shabby. I can't do those things with you. Me, bring myself down to your level? No, I'm never doing that. But it also leads to another reaction or another attitude, which is this attitude that you have to do so much. You have to work so hard. You got to get everything that you want to get, and you got to work, and you got to bust your butt to get it. And what you end up doing in that process, you push everybody away. You can't ever accept anything. It's the gift of receiving. You can't ever receive a gift, right, without thinking that you have to earn it, or without thinking that you have to pay it back. You never want to be a burden upon anyone. You never want to depend on anyone. You always want to be able to say, I did this. I accomplished this. Nobody helped me. I did it on my own. I don't need your help. I am going to get what I want. And in reality, depending on what the issue is, we fluctuate back and forth on both sides of the coin, don't we? On one thing, you might think you're really great. But another thing, you think you're so shabby you can't even measure. And so if you're too good, you push people away. But if you're not good enough, you push people away. If you're too good, you say, I don't need God. But if you think you're not good enough, then you say, I can't have God. It's this endless cycle of enslavement that we live in. So we don't know what freedom is. Because no matter what we do, that question circles around our head. Is this good enough? Is this acceptable? Is this worthy? And so it's easy then, if you read the rest of the text, as I said earlier, for the result of a life of slavery, the deeds of the flesh are what Paul says it is. But I love it the way that the Message version says it. This is what it is. He says, the result of a life that's not free, or the result of a life that is in slavery is this. He says, life that is repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness, trinket gods, magic show religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, an impotence to love or to be loved, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded and lopsided pursuits, the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community. And I could go on. That's the result of a life that's enslaved. And I think we would all agree in here that if that's the life that we're living, it doesn't resemble anything close to freedom, does it? Is there any true joy in any of the things that we just read? So now we're probably thinking, okay, Pastor, you've done a sufficient and really great job of making me feel terrible today. But the question we ask is, if that's what being enslaved is, and if indeed we are enslaved to this most of the time, then what is freedom? And that's what I want to focus on and end with. What is freedom? What if I told you that the definition of freedom, in my opinion, is this? Freedom is understanding that at all times, no matter what, that you and I, that we are both more than good enough and never good enough at the same time. Shall I repeat that? Freedom is understanding that at all times, no matter what, that we are both more than good enough and never good enough, all at the same time, all the time, every day, forever and ever, until we meet God face to face. What does that mean, right? It means that there's nothing that you can do or can't do. There's nothing that you will or you won't do. There's nothing that you do right or nothing that you do wrong that will ever change or increase or decrease your standing with God. Again, shall I repeat that? There's nothing that you can or can't do, nothing that you will or won't do, nothing that you do right or nothing you do wrong that will ever change your standing with God. But the critical question is, are you okay with that? Does that sit well with you? Let's bring it down one level. If that was the way it was with your parents, would that actually be good with you? Would you like it if that's the way your parents approached you? They said, it doesn't matter what you do. Nothing you do will ever change the way that I feel about you. Now, on one hand, it sounds good, doesn't it? Oh, that'd be awesome. I can do whatever I want, right? But if we really think deep down, don't we want to earn our parents' favor? Don't we want them to think that we're great because of what we do? Now, I get it. For some of your parents, they probably make you feel this way very, very sufficiently. They make you feel like you're not good enough or whatever the case might be. But if we take it up to God, are we really okay with a God that says it doesn't matter what you do, how you do it, when you do it, what you don't, what you will do, I love you the same no matter what, because it's not what you do, it's what I have done. Because Christ didn't save us because he needed us. He didn't save us because we earned it. He saved us because he wanted to. And because he saved us, it clearly tells us that we're not good enough. Never will be good enough. We will never actually hit the standard that he says needs to be hit for us to be right in his eyes, which is perfection. And we are never or will ever be perfect. I think that's fairly clear to assume. But because of what he has done for us, we are more than perfect. We are way more than perfect, clearly in the eyes of God. We are surely not good enough, never will be good enough, and simultaneously we are more than good enough, will always be good enough because Christ in us is perfect righteousness. Did you notice if you were paying attention, did you notice the conjunction in the middle, the little word that connects the two? I said, we will never ever be good enough, never ever will be good enough. And then what was the next word? And, not but. But that's the way we talk, isn't it? I will never ever be good enough. Nothing I'm ever going to do. I get it. Okay, Pastor, I get it. I'm never going to be good enough, but I'm going to sure try to be good enough. But that's not what Christ says to us. Freedom is, I'm never going to be good enough. And by his grace, I'm so much more than good enough. Because of what Christ does, we're heirs, sons and daughters, no longer debtors, no longer owers, no longer anything. We're sons and daughters of God, our King. And nothing is going to change that. The gift is free. A professor of mine put it this way. He says, we all at the same time, all the time, every day, we're human, we're sinners, and we're saints. We're a walking oxymoron. Yeah, is that the word? I had a brain fart there. We're a walking contradiction. You are the greatest sinner ever to live, and yet you are the greatest saint ever to live, all at the same time. It is the truth. It is the reality. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we okay with that? Are you okay with accepting the free gift that Christ gives, which says you are always and will be good enough, but you're never good enough? Because in truth, we'd rather be good enough. Because we're enslaved to this mentality that says, I'm going to be good enough, watch me. You doubt me, watch me. You hate me, watch me. You think I'm good, I'm going to be better. None of us likes to actually stand there and say, you know what, I'm really actually no good at much. But God tells me that I'm perfect. If you look inside my heart, it's wretched, it's filthy. But because of Christ, it's perfect and it's holy. This is freedom, friends. The ability to humbly admit and to gloriously accept that we are human, saint, and sinner all at the same time. That we are free humans, free saints, and free sinners all the time. We are free when God comes to rescue us and he exerts care into our lives. And we joyfully trust. Freedom is joyful gratitude. Being so thankful because you know you don't owe anything, you won't ever owe anything. Freedom is joyful trust, completely overjoyed that grace saves us and nothing else, that we don't need anything else, that the cross has paid it all. Freedom is joyful security, knowing that I am a son and a daughter of God, the Almighty. That I don't have to clean myself up because I'm afraid, or I don't have to do things because I'm afraid, because my Father comes down to clean with me. Freedom is joyful love, loving and caring for others, doing what's best for them, because it is the only natural response to freedom, to grace. So remember when I told you that freedom isn't being you or doing you? Sorry, I lied. Freedom is being you and doing you and not letting anyone say otherwise. Freedom is being you, saint and sinner, all at the same time. Freedom is being you, being sons and daughters, no matter what anyone says. Freedom is being you, being wretched and wondrous all at the same time, being broken and secure, loathsome and loving. Freedom is doing you to accept grace and to give grace all the time. Question is, are we free? And more importantly, do you want freedom? Do you want to accept the love that God gives and to give it? Not because you have to, but because it's what happens in us. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. It is in freedom that we love and let ourselves be loved. As I invite the praise team back up to finish us in some praise, I want you to think about this for a second. I think it's critical for us to think about this. How do we come to this place? Because there are going to be days where you're going to come in here and you're not going to want to do anything. There are going to be days where you're going to come in here, you're not going to want to sing, you're not going to want to stand, you're not going to want to do anything, but you feel like you have to because people are looking at you, or God is looking at you, or whatever. Are you okay with the fact that God, in many ways, doesn't care? That his acceptance of you is free and true? To be able to come in here and say, God, I don't have much to give to you. Actually, I don't have anything to give to you, but you give me everything and I'm okay with that. Or are we forever going to be enslaved to the mentality that you have to be good enough, that you have to do enough, that you have to be enough? Or as we sang earlier, is indeed grace enough? Are you okay with the fact that you're the person who murdered somebody's friend and who got off scotch-free and then wasn't taken in by that family to live? Or are you going to spend your entire life trying to prove that you're worth something? Friends, I hope and I pray that you would allow grace, the hands of God and the love of God to come and surround you and take you. To rest in the freedom that says, I am nothing, and yet I have and am everything. So will we join into that freedom today? I am set free. And may you, as you journey on from this day, each day, and onward, may you be indeed free to live, free to love, free to dance, free to sing, free to be and to do you. Amen.